Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day you're listening to this lecture. Again, a very warm welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to listen and watch this lecture. In this session, I'm going to talk about my career pathway and what I know now about career development that at a much earlier stage of my career, when it was all happening, I didn't really know what it was all about and what I should do better to develop my career. So I'm going to talk in quite a personal way about my career and offer you some lessons and suggestions that you might find helpful to apply to the planning of your career and its development over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe a byline or another title for this presentation is the importance of networks, partnerships and relationships, because I see these as really core and central to the development of not only a successful career, but a career that is both satisfying and one that you will feel very proud about in the coming years. When I think about all of the projects and activities that I'm involved with, research projects, training initiatives like this, and so on, I can categorize some of them, a couple of handfuls, as being very successful initiatives where what was achieved was the aims and objectives of the project and the activity and so on. But as I'm sure all of you have already had the experience of, not everything works out as well as we would wish. And quite often as researchers, we are more ambitious, or our aims, objectives and goals are sometimes aspirational and very difficult to achieve. If we don't achieve those, I don't think of those as failures. I think of those as learning experiences. So as long as we reflect on why we were not able to achieve the goals or the aims of a project or activity, then I think it's a learning experience where we can then derive an understanding of what happened or didn't happen, and then apply those learnings to other similar activities and initiatives in the future. If we finish the activity and then just forget about it, and then we don't reflect on any learnings, then I think we maybe should categorize that as a failure, but I'm sure none of you will do that. The other feature of any career in the modern world, and particularly any career that is related to health and which you have an aspiration to impact positively on health in your region or country or region of the world, global health, you know, that these are complex challenges. The world's changing very rapidly, and what was the case 5, 10 years ago is no longer the case now. And with the advent of COVID during 2020, I think that's an illustration of my point that 12 months ago, none of us could have predicted what would happen in the world. And the experience of COVID on, I'm sure, your personal and family lives, many of you, but also on your careers and your projects and other activities, all of these are profound influences. And if we are to still negotiate our way around these challenges and to continue to develop our careers, then we've got to think about how we can do that, and we've got to plan for things as best we can. But one also has to accept that unpredictable things will happen, and then you have to look at the ways in which you can then overcome those challenges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the life of Brian, or my career, and some important features of my career and how it's developed. And then towards the end, I'll just talk about some of my lessons or learnings. And I'm happy just to tell you what are the major learnings I've derived from my career. And then I would encourage you to reflect on those and think about how you might apply those learnings to your own careers in terms of analysing how your careers have developed so far, but more importantly, how you can plan your career for the future. If I think back to when I was a little kid, and this is a photo of me as a young child, and in the years after this, when I went to school and university, I could never have predicted what I would be doing 20, 30 years later with my career in global health and implementation science and my collaboration with the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases and running this kind of program. Of course, I had no idea that these things would be possible. And even when I became involved with research in India, working very closely with institutes there and colleagues who I'll mention later, in Kerala and southern India, in 2010, 2011, when we first got funding for the projects there in diabetes prevention, I still didn't really have any idea about the things that would happen 10 years later, because at that stage, GACD didn't really exist as an organisational network. It was just being planned. And it's then over the ensuing years that I became more involved with GACD, and that led to the development of this network and training programs. So why do I do what I do? I've had three relatively distinct phases to my career. I call these the psychology phase, the public health phase, and the global public health phase. In the psychology phase, I originally trained in clinical psychology, and I was working in some different community health centres and mental health institutions in Australia and then in the UK for some years. And over that time, I became more interested in research and epidemiology. So then I trained more formally in chronic disease epidemiology and public health, and completed my PhD in 1987, and then worked in some different schools of public health at the University of Sydney, and then I was the inaugural director of public health at a new school in Queensland in Australia until 2004. And then in 2004, 2005, I relocated to Melbourne, set up an international public health unit at Monash University. And then in 2015, about 6 years ago, I relocated to the University of Melbourne. So those are the, chronologically the different phases of my career. But, even when I relocated to Monash University in 2004, where I became more directly involved in international public health, global public health, I really had no idea at that stage about the increasing depth of my collaboration in India and China and other countries. That was really only just beginning to happen in the early 2000s. I want to say something about research training and research trainees, because for me in my career, supervision of students, particularly doctoral students, but also mentoring many postdoctoral trainees and other kinds of trainees over my career has not only been a source of great satisfaction, and I've really enjoyed it, but it's also influenced very much the research I do, many of the projects I become involved with, because what I do and what's become my focus is often very much influenced by the learnings and experiences of my students and my trainees. Tilahan Harego, who's one of the facilitators for this program, he came from Ethiopia to undertake his PhD with us when I was at Monash University. When he finished his PhD, he then went to Kenya for a couple of years to do a postdoc, and then came back to Melbourne. And now, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really deepened our collaboration. And in my or in our program, Tillahan is now leading some of our international projects and other activities. Satish also did his PhD with us, another one of the trainees, and is one of the facilitators for this program. When he finished his PhD in chronic disease epidemiology and working on our Kerala diabetes prevention program in southern India that you're going to hear more about from some of the other lecturers, he subsequently has taken up a postdoc in Canada, been there for the last couple of years, but we still continue a very deep collaboration. Yin Gong, another one of our facilitators, she's doing her PhD at the moment, in the last year of her PhD, working on a stroke rehabilitation and M Health program in northern China, and also one of our digital health intervention programs in Melbourne. She's already published many papers from these 2 trials, and is at the stage where she's now starting to think about her future career, what her options are in the world, and where she might or how she'll do a postdoc, etc. Zara Aziz, you've already come across in this program. Zara is really coordinating many aspects of this training school. Zara did her PhD with us, again on the Kerala Diabetes Prevention Program. She is now a tenured academic staff member at Monash University, but is continuing to collaborate a lot with us at the University of Melbourne. So I'm just mentioning these people as examples of individuals like yourselves who are finishing their PhDs, finished their PhDs a couple of years ago, and all of them now are finding their way in the world and doing exceptionally well. Another trainee who I've observed her career developing terrifically well over the last 4 to 5 years is Kavitha Singh, and another one of the facilitators from this program. And I really urge you to listen and watch her lecture for this career development theme in the program, because you'll learn from Kavitha a wonderful story about her career development and how she's built her career block by block over a number of years. So that's a terrific story, and I think will be very informative for you. But again, I would have to say that I have probably learnt as much from each of these people as they might have learned from me. So it's been very much a two-way experience. My global career really, as I look back now, began through a collaboration with colleagues in Finland in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And that was when I first met Dr. Pilviki Atsets, one of the other international faculty from this school. And we collaborated on a diabetes prevention trial in Finland. Pilviki then became very involved with our diabetes prevention program, or some other programs we were involved with in Victoria and Australia, and then subsequent to that also in India. And that collaboration in Finland was very much informed by this very famous cardiovascular disease prevention program called the North Korea Project, which has really infused so much of the practice of and policy related to public health in Finland, but also in many other countries in the world. And although Finland, the weather is very different to Australia, and there are other important differences between Finnish culture and society and Australia, I learned a lot from the collaboration in Finland, which I subsequently applied those learnings in Australia, and then subsequent to that, adapted a diabetes prevention program with colleagues in India, which became the Kerala Diabetes Prevention Program. This slide is just to demonstrate the climactic differences between Finland and Australia. I want to now give 3 examples of building networks and partnerships that I've been involved with over the last 20 years to just sort of illustrate some of the points I'm making. The first relates to China, and I first visited China in the 1990s, and the collaboration has just really deepened there over the last 20 to 25 years. And that started really through some students who I was supervising while I was director of a School of Public Health at Queensland University of Technology in Australia. And also through those students and their professors in China, we established exchange programs of researchers and health service managers to spend time in Australia. So the collaboration really developed from those experiences. And then from the early 2000s until 2008, I was a public health advisor for the Beijing Olympic Games, which gave me some really fascinating insights into so many different aspects of Chinese society and culture, also their public health system, and also working quite closely with Chinese government and health ministry and so on. So that was a very impressive and formative experience for me over those years, which from then developed into many other collaborations in China. Dr. Zhifeng Zhang, one of the facilitators from this program, I began to collaborate with her and her team in one of the Centers for Disease Control in China, and then subsequent to that, she was just finishing her PhD through a combined doctoral program between Mahidol University in Thailand and University of North Carolina. She then came to Australia for a couple of years to undertake a postdoc, and we've continued our collaboration in different kinds of heart disease prevention and intervention trials, peer support programs, and other kinds of projects in China. My second example is to come back to the development of a research collaboration in India over 15 years, well, really almost over 20 years now. And I've mentioned this already, and you'll hear more about some of the projects coming out of this collaboration over the next 2 weeks from Dr. Absets and Dr. Aziz. They will each be giving lectures and talking about some of the research work. And this program has become known as the Kerala Diabetes Prevention Program, although from this program, other projects and activities have used this as a kind of a springboard. But you know, when we first became involved with this project and collaborating in 2010, 2011, from my point of view and the point of view of our team in India, we needed to understand a lot more just about Kerala and India society and how we would adapt a diabetes prevention program to that context. And since that time, we've then gone on to published a lot of papers. There have been a lot of PhD students and trainees who have been involved with this program, but arguably it's also had some impact, I hope, on policy and practice, particularly in the state of Kerala in India, more recently Tamil Nadu, and some of the learnings have now extended to other parts of India, and I would say also other countries as well. Fundamentally important to this program has been working with the local community very significantly, and this photo just shows the 60 peer supporters who led and co-led the groups in the local community with people who were identified as having high risk of diabetes. So I learned a lot about real grassroots, community-based research from working with these people and collaborating with the other colleagues in India who were running the project there. So this was a very exciting project in its active phase from up until 2016, 2017, and then it's reactivated again in the last couple of years because we've now got another GACD scale-up grant looking at the scale-up of the learnings and the interventions of this program to the whole of the state of Kerala, also the state of Tamil Nadu, and potentially to other countries and settings as well. But most important, I would say the most important success factor has really been the collaboration with Professor Thankapan, who's a very well-known public health physician in India, and the staff and the colleagues working most closely with him. Elizabeth Matthews, she was doing a PhD at this time. She was the intervention coordinator. This has now catapulted her career, and she now has a terrific academic position at another university in India, and a lot of the other staff and colleagues have gone on to other positions as well. My third example relates to developing research training and capacity building programs, and I just want to highlight one example of a program called the Ascend Research Network program in southern South Asia, which involved trainees, 50 trainees from India, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia. And this was a grant, a capacity building training D43 grant from the Fogarty Center for International Health at the US National Institutes of Health. It was funded formally from 2010 actually until about 2016. But the program has continued in various kinds, and in fact the learnings from this program have developed into other programs and actually have fed a lot into the design of this training school that you're now participating in. We were doing face-to-face training for this program, but we also had an online platform that we were using, which we developed for the first time for this program. It's evolved a lot from that time until what we're doing now, I would say. And what we learned about this program was just the importance of having faculty deeply involved. This is Professor Thankapan again, and really deep involvement between the faculty and the trainees, so we could all learn a lot from one another, but also a lot of learning by doing, encouraging the trainees to give presentations, to stand up and talk, to interact with policymakers, to do many of the things that we've now built into this GACD training school as well. This program was mainly being conducted within the countries themselves. A few of the trainees did then subsequently undertake PhDs. For example, Satish, you can see there, subsequently came to Melbourne to do his PhD with us, but most of the trainees continued their training in their own countries. So this was a tremendous program, and I learned a lot. And then, you know, the learnings from that program have then fed into this training school as well for the next 2 weeks. So those are just three illustrations of the importance of collaboration, building networks, and sustaining and nurturing those over a number of years for both research, for training students, and for training and capacity building in global public health. So in the remainder of this presentation now, I just want to talk about what I've learned about building a research career in a global world, which comes out of some of those experiences I've just talked about, but also involvement with many other projects and activities over the last 20 or 30 years. So my first point is that building a career is like a large-scale implementation project for life, if you like. And this is for you, this is your career. And given your investment in your career and your career is developing alongside everything else you're doing in your life, you know, your family, your families, your relationships, and so on. So it's important that you put some effort into planning and reviewing your career progress. Some people don't do this because they think that, well, things can change in an instant, like COVID has impacted so much this year. So what's the point in trying to plan something which is going to change? But when we undertake our projects, our research projects, we still make plans. You know, we have detailed protocols. We get funding for these. We implement. If changes occur, we adjust. We make iterative improvements and so on. Well, our career should be the same, and I'd urge all of you to really sit down and analyze your career. I'll say something about mentors later on, talking to other people about your career with your partners and other people. And you should review this, formally review this at least every 3 to 5 years. In fact, often, you know, probably doing it every year, but not making big changes every year, but just seeing if you're on track, what you can change, what you can improve. Are there grants you should be applying for? Should you be considering other qualifications and so on? Going through this review process. But I always say that you have to be prepared for opportunities. The English expression is out of the blue. Because if I look back at my career, so many of the things that have happened, good things that have happened in my career, I could never have predicted. And I like to use this word serendipity, things that are serendipitous. And if you look at the meaning of this word, the meaning of the word means good luck in finding valuable things unintentionally. So good things can happen, but they are unpredictable. And being open to those unpredictable good things happening, these can often be events, chance meetings with people at a conference, meeting someone who you could talk to, who might just send your career in a different direction, etc. Yeah, I think it's very important to be open to these possibilities. I know this slide is a little bit hard to see, and you can look at it by yourselves, but what it sort of describes is the experience of undertaking a project or doing a PhD. So starting here at the City of Hope, moving through the problem range, deciding on some hypotheses, going through the different stages. Here's the mountain of where are we going, the canyon of despair, the data analysis jungle, the heap of discarded hypotheses, where am I fog, the great fundless desert, the desert without any funding, the plains of report writing, the bog of lost manuscripts, the delta of editors, delta of editors sending your papers to many journals. So any project or your career, it is this kind of journey, and there are highs and lows, and the challenge is how you can maximize the number of highs and ensure that you achieve your ambitions and that you're very satisfied and proud of what you are doing. With my trainees and students, and I know they're sick of me saying this, it is about persistence, and more persistence, because only by aiming and aspiring to become better and better researchers, learning how to write in academic English, learning the rules of grantsmanship to get funding. These are all activities which often it's assumed that people are naturally good at doing these things. And from my experience, that's actually not the case. The people who are best at publishing papers, the people who are best at writing really good grant applications, the people who are best interacting with policymakers and program implementers and practitioners are the people who persist, and they become better and better and better at it. So if you identify someone who you think is more senior to you and just naturally seems to be able to write papers really well, talk to them about it, and you'll probably almost certainly find they've only become really good at that because they've done it so many times. So that expression in English, practice makes perfect, really is true, and you can only keep practicing and getting better if you really persist at doing that. I think this next point is obvious from the examples I've already given, that in public health, there's not much that we can do by ourselves or with a single discipline. It really requires working in multidisciplinary teams and developing and nurturing collaborations and partnerships, which become stronger over time, because without having those kinds of networks and partnerships, it's very difficult to have much impact just as a single individual. And as you will hear from the other international faculty who will talk on this point, there's many different fields and disciplines which contribute to public health practice and implementation science, and that field in particular. And no single individual can have expertise in all of these fields or disciplines. So then you really need to reach out to other people and teams who will contribute that kind of expertise and input. And depending on the particular project or activity, the mix of disciplines or the mix of fields required is going to be different and unique to that project. Working in teams, there's now a lot of discussion about team science, working in teams, and there's whole websites devoted to this. For example, this wonderful website that you can look at the US National Cancer Institute provides many tools that you can use to build multidisciplinary teams. My next point is about funding. Funding's really tough to get, and I could imagine in most of your countries and contexts, it's even tougher for you to get than it is in my context. But even if you get funding, it's almost never enough to do what you want to do. So you also have to make choices and decisions about what you can do. What I always say is that even if you can't get funding, or you can't get all the funding that you require or need, at least look practically at what you can do with the resources, either very often the personal resources that you've got from yourself and other people you're working with, even if you don't have other funds, and look at what's possible to do. It's always possible to do some rapid review or to analyse the policy and practice in the local context, and then look at what a response might be to the current policy and practice and how to improve that and so on. Often I think we are over aspirational with our projects. We always think of very big projects, but then of course those are always very tough to get the funding for, and even if we get the funding, they're very difficult to implement and take a long time to get the findings. Often it's possible to do smaller projects and to get results more quickly, and often to get results which can still make a very important difference, and then you can build incrementally on those smaller projects over time. The role of mentors is very important, and I hope we have a chance to discuss this more in some of the plenary sessions and probably in the small groups, for all of you to talk about the mentors you already have in your lives, for your careers and other aspects of your lives, and how mentors can really help you think about the course and directions of your career, and how you can develop your career, and or when you run into problems or difficulties, are there people who you can talk to get reflections and suggestions about how you can make a difference. I think often we get hung up on just having a single mentor. I think it's good to have more than one mentor, and maybe your mentors will change over your career and over your life depending on your context and situation. So Professor Gavin Andrews was a very important mentor for me. He was my doctoral supervisor. He's a professor of psychiatry who just recently retired in his late 80s. And I've continued to have some interaction with him over my career, but my more deep interaction was during my PhD and probably the first 4 or 5 years after that. Professor Graham MacDonald was a professor of nephrology and a renal physician, and he was someone who I got to know when I was working in a university teaching hospital, and I used to interact with him occasionally, sometimes more frequently through many years of my career, over many years. So he was very important for my career development. Professor Pekka Puska, you might recall I mentioned the North Karelia project in Finland. He was very important for that cardiovascular disease prevention program, and co-leading the establishment of that in the early 1970s. I learned a lot from him in the 1990s, and I've continued to interact with him until even the more recent years. So these are just 3 examples of mentors who have been important in my life. Lastly, I want to highlight, and I think this is obvious from your involvement actually in this training school, but your role as both as current leaders and as a future leader, because you can learn a lot, you can do a lot, but you can do even more if you're able to really develop your leadership potential and your leadership roles. And by that, I'm not suggesting that all of you have to be in administrative leadership roles, because if you take on those roles, often then that can limit what you can achieve with your research activities and your other projects and research development. But there's many different kinds of leaders, and I think it's important that you think about how you can be the best leader that you can, that's going to also be suitable and appropriate for your context and settings that you're working in. Because if you can then expand and develop your leadership qualities, then that means you're also going to be able to have an impact on other people's lives as well, both staff and students and trainees who are part of your programs in the future. But also, if you're working in healthcare settings, this will also benefit other staff in those settings and the patients who are receiving services from those from the healthcare delivery and so on. Finally, I just want to make the point, though, that I think I've made this point already, that you can't predict everything that happens. And even though I think it's important that you have a plan and a path that you're going to follow, the reality is going to end up being very different to that. There's going to be ups and downs, and you're going to go up dead ends and cul-de-sacs and streets that don't go anywhere and so on. And then you have to decide how you negotiate those changes in direction. And very often it's from that analysis of a change in direction that serendipity kicks in, and you'll find that maybe then you go in a different direction to one that you had originally planned. So then your plan becomes a different plan from the one that you have previously. Not necessarily to go in a 90-degree or 180-degree different direction. Maybe it's only 5 degrees to the right or left, but often that's enough to then open up other doorways and possibilities. So I hope this lecture is helpful and informative, and it will be great to have an opportunity to discuss these learnings and ideas in your smaller groups and the plenary lectures. Thank you very much.